Jeff is on the It's good.
Welcome everybody to the Simons Institute. I'm Nikhil Srivastava. I'm a senior scientist here at the Institute. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Institute is the world's leading venue for collaborative research in theoretical computer science. It was established by a generous gift from the Simons Foundation in 2012, who continues to support us. And our primary goal here is to explore the use of algorithmic thinking in science, engineering, and related fields. And we do this by organizing semester programs, many of which are outward looking towards other disciplines. And so we're very excited about this program. And I'd like to welcome you to this workshop on understanding higher level intelligence from AI, psychology, and neuroscience perspectives. And I want to thank the organizers, Nate Dolensek and Shiri Gunosar, for organizing this workshop. So let's give them a hand. And before we start, just a few logistics. So there will be food outside in the coffee breaks, and all the plates are compostable. We won't provide lunch, but I encourage you to go explore the ever-changing landscape of restaurants outside for lunch. If you want to leave your bag when you go to lunch, there are lockers on the other side of this floor, which are quite convenient. And one thing we ask is that please don't bring food or drink into the auditorium. It's quite clean, and that's kind of how we keep it that way. And finally, our videographer Omid Farr will be recording the talks. And if you have any technical issues with your talks, with your slides or talk, please ask him. So as you know, this is becoming this kind of a hybrid workshop at this point. So we have many participants on Zoom. And so if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and we'll pass you the mic so the online participants can hear. And if you're online, please ask questions via the Q&A. I want to thank Ashley Hassan, Francis Klingenberger, and Frida Orr, who did all the hard work to organize the actual functioning of this workshop. So let's give them a hand as well. And now I'll hand it over to Sherry to begin the workshop.
Thank you. Okay, welcome. This is much stranger than the first workshop we had, which was like basically completely full. But hello, everybody who is also online. So my name is Shiri, and we've been doing this for a month, and it's been a fantastic 3 weeks so far, and I'm really glad to see you all here and have you join us. The reason we are here is because we've made a lot of progress recently in AI, especially in language. And when you make a lot of progress, it's a good time to stop and think a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so we're here because we want to think about how all this progress can help us understand not just artificial intelligence, but also biological intelligence. And also from the AI perspective, to think about whether we're actually going in the direction that we want to go. I mean, language is very cool. There's a lot of language people here today, but it's just one capability out of a lot of capabilities that natural organisms and intelligent systems have. And one question is, how can we think about the other types of things that we can do, and how can we model them in a scientific perspective, which we don't really know how to do. And so for that, we gathered together a lot of really world experts from many different fields. We have here people from AI, from psychology, from neuroscience, from philosophy, from psychiatry, comparative psychology, all kinds of people. And this shouldn't be just a place for you to come and give a talk. Everybody is super nice. We only collected really nice people. And so your job this week, and as it was for this whole month, is to pick somebody that you don't know from outside your field and to go make friends. Because the most interesting conversations that you can have here is from somebody from a completely different field. And that's exactly the point of why we're here. Another thing that we're doing is we are co-authoring, a bunch of us are co-authoring a publication to come out of this, kind of specifying an agenda for research for maybe the next 10 years in this intersection of these different disciplines that all study intelligence. And if you want to participate in that, let me know. But in the meantime, I've also asked all the speakers today to put up at least one slide saying, what do you think are the open problems that exist, and how, especially the open problems where it would be interesting to look at them from more than one field perspective. And these should be really good conversation starters also for maybe starting a collaboration. I know that at least me and Nate also here, I have like 3 different projects that started out from this month with people that I didn't even know before. So that's kind of cool. Another thing is take a lot of pictures. We're going to do some social stuff as well. This is going to be supposed to be a lot of fun. We have a place to upload all of these things. And what else should I say? I think that's it, right? All right. So I want to thank all of my co-organizers, including Christos, who promised me he will be here in person, but due to force majeure is not able to. And thank you for all the Simons folks, Shafi Goldwasser and Sandy Irani, who kind of let us in to begin with, and all the staff here, Frida and Atia and Ashley, who helped all of you come here today and organize everything. So without further ado, oh, sorry, one more thing. We have Nate. Nate Dolensek is a postdoc with Doris Tsao. He's a neuroscientist. He cares about social understanding and social representations in the brain. And he is going to be the MC for the week. So he's going to keep us on time. He's going to tell you when to go and when to stop and all that. So he's running the show. And the other thing I want to say is that we have a lot of really famous speakers. This is a really fully packed schedule. And so we're going to cut on introductions. So everybody here has a lot of awards. Everybody's really famous. You're coming from really great places, but we're just going to say, okay, now it's Christos and he's going to give a talk just to cut the chaff. All right. So without further ado, Christos, it is a pleasure to see you even remotely. And I'll let you take it from here.
Same for me. Thank you very much, Sherry. Listen, I have been eavesdropping on your intellectual life these past few weeks and with envy. And I was so much looking forward to participate. And I'll still do it, still try to do it. I will attend everything that happens this week. And thanks for inviting me to give a talk. I want to, before giving this talk at the Simons Institute, I want to remember that this week the Simons community lost a great scientist, Luca Trevisan, one of the founding senior scientists of the institute. And he died in his mid-50s, tragically. A truly remarkable scientist, unforgettable friend, unique individual. Okay, I will remember him. We will remember him. Without further ado, let me come to my, am I sharing? Can you see my slide?
Christos, we can't see your slide. We can just see you right now.
Okay, so I have to share. Sorry, I thought I was.
No problem. Okay, we can see your desktop now.
Excellent. That's a good step. And here we are. Great. So
Looks good.
About my title, it's a very interesting question. Okay, it's so interesting that it has been asked for about a century all over the world by very famous people. So by asking it again, I'm standing in the shadow of giants. Okay, so and here is another slightly more pointed and more poetic way of stating it. What is the neural basis of language? And we have known enough. We have known a lot this past century about this important question. I have here 2 of my favorite books on this, I want to do something with it, with this question. Okay, I want to point out that this way of stating it suggests that there may be a real hypothesis there. Okay, the hypothesis about the brain, and here's what I mean. Here's the hypothesis: that language is enabled, depends on a set of novel neural features at the molecular, cellular, circuit, and/or system level, which are unique to the human brain. And we know there are features that are unique to the human brain. A couple of years ago, we found these incredible neurons in the layer 2 of the human cortex, which are able of computing XOR, something that ordinary neurons, integrated and fire neurons, cannot do, of course. So this seems to be a possible articulation of the question, all right? I mean, and just to make clear where I stand on this, I don't believe it, okay? So, this talk is about the null hypothesis, okay? And what's the null hypothesis? It's this, that a language system can be built on top of the mammalian brain from simple components and a few basic and widely accepted neuroscience principles. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about. All right, so I believe that this is another interesting hypothesis, and in fact, it's a hypothesis that, if successful, if true, if it's pursued, is successful, may reveal a lot about language. Okay, in the spirit of Richard Feynman. Okay, that creating a language organ is much better than finding the evolutionary magic that enabled it. Okay, so let's see if how this goes, the question is, what are these few basic and widely accepted neuroscience principles? And it turns out that famous neuroscientists, I mean, the most famous of all, have been thinking about this. Okay, so basically, what Richard Axel was lamenting 6 years ago is that we were lacking a logic for the transformation of neural activity into thought. Okay, in other words, a logic for the transformation of neural activity into cognition, right? I mean, so, what would this logic be? To my mind, logic means a formal system or a set of principles, a set of axioms, okay? Can you articulate a few basic tenets of neuroscience that essentially are enough? Okay, that span a lot of what we want to span. Okay, I hope everybody recognizes this book. It's the famous Principles of Neuroscience book, Candela Schwartz, and this book is also famous because every 4 years a new edition comes out, and it is 300 pages thicker. Okay, and if you think about it. For a book whose title is Principles, this is not right. Okay, principles should be shrinking, not expanding, right? I mean, so I mean, when the Greeks wanted to find the principles of geometry, they worked hard for centuries until they put them in 5 lines. Okay, 4 axioms and a postulate. Okay, Can we do the same for here? Okay, this is I believe a very interesting challenge, and I believe also that this is what Axel is thinking or is seeking. I have a proposal. So what Axel is asking us to do is to find something, a question mark, that links spiking neurons and synapses to cognitive phenomena. Okay, and what I have to propose is this model, NEMO, for neural model, and it models reasonably well, I will argue, spiking neurons and synapses, and implements through simulation cognitive phenomena. Okay, so this is the plan of my talk. Okay, if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt. If this is allowed by the chair, I don't know what the rules are. Okay, good. Marching on. I think NEMO is the simple possible model of the brain. It's simplest in a rather precise way, in the sense that if you, it's minimalistic, economical. If you omit any line, okay, we didn't reach 5 lines like the Greeks, but I came close. If you omit any of these lines, I believe that I believe I can prove that nothing interesting can happen. Okay, so here's what it is. We postulate neurons, lots of them. They are divided into brain areas. Brain area is a unit of both connectivity and of inhibition. There are random synapses, and their weights are random, okay, or unit if you want in the beginning. Firing happens in discrete steps, something that is not realistic, but it's not distortive. You have in-area inhibition. In other words, in every area, only few of the neurons fire, and so on. And there is plasticity and long-range inhibition. So let me show you the model very quickly. Finite number of brain areas. Here you have 5 areas. Each has n excitatory neurons. Think of n as 1 million. Within every area, there are lots of random synapses. Okay, so maybe every neuron is connected to about 1,000 other neurons in the same area. Okay, so about probabilistic, randomly. So these are the green arrows. Those are the red arrows, which are fibers, okay? Certain pairs of areas are connected by fibers of random connections also. Good. Very sparse random connection. Inhibition means that in every area, only K, a much smaller number, let's say 1,000 out of the million neurons, fire in each area. And these are the ones that happen to have the highest synaptic input from the previous step, okay? And of course, there is a possibility here that this area could be inhibited, in which case this would not happen. And finally, Hebbian plasticity. If neuron I fires and neuron J fires at the next step, and there is a synapse from I to J, then the weight of this synapse is increased by, let's say, 5%. And that's it. Nothing else. These are the only assumptions of the model. I believe this is uncontroversial neuroscience, a little bit stylized and simplified, but still easily supported. And this defines a dynamical system. The state of the system are the neurons that spike at this instant, the synaptic weights, and the areas that are inhibited. And the next step function is fully defined. And so you can run the system. Actually, it can be simulated at the scale of tens of billions of neurons and trillions of synapses. We simulate on a laptop, I mean. One very important thing to know about the operation of this model is that it has a set of very stable and important attractors. Okay, there is an emergent behavior. How is it started? Okay, imagine that one of these areas is a stimulus area, and there are several stimuli defining these stimulus areas, and they fire from time to time. And if this happens, and you let the system run by itself, what will happen eventually is that complicated representations of these stimuli or combinations of these stimuli are going to be created in the various brain areas, and they're going to start evolving and having a life of their own. Okay, so this is what these and these representations, we call them, as people started doing more and more these days, assemblies. Okay, so what are assemblies? Hebb conjectured them, as you know, 75 years ago. They took a long time to find them because recording technology had to improve a lot. People like Buzaki and my Columbia colleague Juste have been championing them and creating them, manipulating them, and so on. I mean, also demonstrating them. And what is an assembly? A large, stable, densely interconnected set of excitatory neurons in the brain area, which represents a particular item, okay? Memory, episodic memory, person, data point, work, and so on. And Giori Busaki calls them the alphabet of the brain, okay? So, that's, those of us who used to agonize about the boundary between symbolic and sub-symbolic intelligence, the brain, assemblies are a good place to consider, okay? Good. All right. And there is one little detail that I've hidden so far, and that's the following. I told you that the areas can be inhibited and disinhibited. How is this done? We assume that besides the areas, there are small populations of neurons, the green squares, with long axons. They are inhibitory neurons. They are extrinsic to the areas. They're separate. And they can inhibit remote brain areas or other long-range interneurons. And they are apt to be recruited by the assemblies of an area, okay, and used to inhibit or disinhibit remote areas. So this is sort of the final building block of this computational system, and it's an important one. They are the program of the computation, essentially. Okay, they are the control elements of this hardware language. Okay, good. So that's the whole description of NeMo. All right, and of course the question is what it can do. If you have computational interests, this is, it's a universal computer, but it doesn't matter much for what we do. These are the folks we are working with. We started all this project long ago with Santos Vempala. Max Dabagia, who is talk about a very interesting other place we took assemblies recently, is a huge part of this project. Mike Collins, NLP colleague from Columbia, now at Google, has been has been a stalwart here. Srini Narayanan is working with us, and also you have been enjoying the presence of Dan Mitropolsky all these weeks, who is graduating soon from Columbia. All right. So if you want to know more about NeMo, there is a PNAS paper from 4 years ago. There is a tackle papers from 2 years ago. There's an archive paper from last year. And there is Dan's GitHub, where you can actually run the brain yourself, okay? That's it's a very accessible system to get acquainted with. All right. So recall, I have a feeling that I'm going too fast and without unbothered. So what, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. All right. So remember what our plan is to demonstrate that.
One second.
Yeah, sure.
You have a question.
Sure.
So Christos, because you asked, so I don't know if you can see us. My name is Yoav Artzi. I'm from Cornell. So I wonder, so what you're describing is a framework for computation, but there could be kind of like different ways to instantiate the human cognition or the brain. And it seems like in order to make arguments that this is what's happening in the brain, it has to be grounded in some kind of like neurological findings and observations rather than an existence of a computational framework, right? Yes.
Thanks, Yoav. That's helpful. There is, I did present. I did present some of the most salient neurological findings from the last 2 decades, establishing that these things exist work and seem to be very crucial to the way cognition emerges from the brain. That these things are meaning assemblies. Okay, and assemblies are essentially the main attractor and also the raison d'être of this system. Okay, so it's not as if there are plenty and exponentially increasing experiments with assemblies in the animal brains and so on. Okay, so this is it's not like I am just showing to you an existence theorem. Okay, so it's people expect that this is there is a growing consensus that they are the basis of cognition. Okay, that they are the basis of cognitive operations.
Great, cool, thanks.
Sure, pleasure. Yeah, and thanks for prodding me on this. If you have any question, especially basic question like the one that you have, I would love to hear it.
One more question.
Sure.
Yeah. On the previous slide, when you're talking about LRIs, I think I missed the concept a bit. Are the LRIs across non-adjacent areas?
So they are LRI. Think of them as areas on their own. Okay, they're small areas that are inhabited by inhibitory populations, and they have long axons. Okay, so they affect other LRIs in other areas. Okay, and these have been studied again. They have been identified by Buzaki more than 10 years ago, and there are experiments showing that they seem to be necessary for brain computation.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
One more.
Thanks. This is Jacob Andreas at MIT. Just following up on
Hi.
your question, the definition that you had given for assemblies a couple of slides back involved also that, not just that you have a group of neurons firing together, but that it's associated, with, thinking about some specific concept.
Right.
Like what's the analog of that here? Or how are you measuring whether the, Nemo is thinking about a particular concept?
So, I don't know a good way to answer that. It will be very clear from context. Okay, so in other words, if this assembly was created solely by the effect of a particular stimulus, then this assembly is thinking about this stimulus. Okay, if it combines two stimuli, or if it is generated under some conditions from a copy of that stimulus, then it may be thinking a slight variant of something else. Okay, so this assemblies essentially have the roots in stimuli. Okay, that's how they have been created. I take that, so this is not actually exactly true. There could be some accidentally created assemblies which then also have a life of their own and create new copies and so on. So this cannot be precluded by the theory. Okay. So one thing that I should tell you is that with Santos Vempala and our students, we have been there is a lot of mathematical theory behind this. Okay, that for everything we know about, we are claiming about assemblies, there are theorems that prove it, and also extensive simulations that support it. Okay. You want me to go on?
Yes, please continue. I think the questions are done for now.
Good. Thanks. All right. So what next? I'm going to tell you how this model implements cognitive phenomena, and which cognitive phenomena would you like me to start? Okay. So so why not go for all the money? Let's do language. All right. So I'll show you how you can implement language in this model, okay, in NeMo. Okay, I mean, so we have created a language system in NeMo. All right, I mean, this is what I'm going to describe to you. Now, 2 years ago in ACL, we have presented a parser in NeMo, okay? For years, it was an impossible dream. Then it became a dream come true. And now we remember it with amused nostalgia as a baby step, okay? But let me tell you very few things about it. Of course, it involved brain areas. We assume that a particular brain area, it's called the lexicon, it had already established some assemblies that represented particular words, okay? And when we input to this parser a sentence, we essentially fire in the right sequence these words: the cat chased the dog, okay? These fire for about, I don't know, a few dozen spikes, and each, and then this is how the input, it's input. And as output, as a result of this input, on the left-hand side of the NeMo parser, you get through strong synaptic connections, a representation of dependency tree of this sentence, okay, a parse of this sentence. Okay, so this is the summary of what it does. Now, for this to happen, the words, the assemblies that represent the words, are equipped with LRIs that essentially have recruited every time they fire, the LRIs fire also, and these LRIs essentially capture the part of speech of the word. Okay, so verbs and adverbs and nouns, they have different sets of LRIs that they fire with them, so this is sort of, I'm not going to tell you much more about the parser, except show you a few of our discussions with the reviewers of the paper. Okay. Okay. First of all, they asked us this. Okay. Now we have LLMs. Okay. So what's the deal? And you are missing the point. Okay. We're not competing with LLM. We don't have backpack propagation. It's biologically plausible. We didn't know there's none of this kind before. And it may be, who knows how good we can make it. All right. I mean, so second one, do you really believe that this is how the brain parses? And the answer is, it's a proof of concept. Okay. So, it's a proof that you don't need sorts of futuristic neural features or spiritual or divine intervention to parse. Okay. But it is also one hypothesis in a place where there was none. Okay. Here's another question. How does this complicated mechanism come about in the baby brain? Okay. And that's a fair point, and that's what I'm going to talk about. All right. Good. So we are going to acquisition. Okay. The hard part is filling the blanks. Okay. Going from this situation to that situation. Okay. This is my daughter, my granddaughter, sorry, 3 years later. Okay. So that's her name is Sapfo. Good. So, and of course, semantics and generation. So here is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this talk: biologically plausible language acquisition. Okay. We use as hardware a NeMo system, a tabula rasa of a couple of dozen brain areas, fibers, and population of LRIs. Together, it's about 100 million neurons and several trillions of synapses. Input is a modest number of grounded sentences in any natural language. Okay, the bold terms are loaded. Okay, they have a meaning that I'm going to describe. Modest, sort of, is supposed to capture the poverty of stimulus. Grounded is even more important. It's grounding. Okay, what does it mean? And the output is a mature language system, able to comprehend and generate sentences in the same language. Is this ambition, is this plan clear? Okay. So here is the experiment. We choose a natural language and a number of tangible nouns and action verbs, transitive and intransitive. Cat, box, chase, eat, toy. Okay. So we choose order of n, okay, where n is the number of the lexicon, sentences using these words. By the way, that's what I mean by modest. It should be a small multiple of the size of the lexicon, okay? I don't know if people who are interested, there is a talk later this afternoon about the language stimulus in babies. If this conception is used, but I believe it's a very clean way to understand the size of stimulus, namely the stimulus cannot be smaller than the lexicon, but should not be too much larger than it. Okay. And in other words, to generate a bunch of sentences, a couple of hundred of sentences of the form: the dog runs, the cat chases the mouse. We input the sentences to the device in a grounded way, okay? And this is, as I told you, important and complicated. Here is what I mean. What does grounding mean? What does the dog runs grounded, okay? It means that while the sentence is read, is input to the device, and again, it's input as the parser by sequentially firing the dog and runs, okay? At the same time, throughout this presentation, there are the sort of regions, brain areas that are adjacent to the language organ, like mirror neurons in the motor cortex, the inferotemporal cortex in the vision system, maybe the auditory cortex, the amygdala and the basal ganglia for emotions and so on. They have representations that are active, okay, that are firing, okay, this is what it means for the sentence to be grounded. The appropriate, and basically this recalls Humboldt's diction that language is between the brain and the world. Okay, this is the world. This is the brain's interface with the world, and this is how the world enters language. Good. Of course, it enters language in a different way through the input, through the linguistic input. All right. So we do this presentation of the few hundred sentences, and then we have to make two tests. Has the device learned the syntactic role and meaning of the words? Okay. After the presentation, we check that robust representation of each word have been created in the correct lexicon area. Okay, noun versus verb. We assume that our language system has two lexical areas, a different lexical area for nouns and different for verbs. And it's important that when the baby hears the dog runs, eventually it realizes that dog is the animal and runs is the action. Okay, so this is not trivial. Okay, even for intransitive verbs like the dog runs. Here is why: because imagine that the baby hears dog runs. Okay, it has no right to know if this is English or Irish. If it's English, dogs is the animal. If it's Irish, dogs is the action. Okay. And this must be disambiguated through subtle statistical signals, okay? And it can be done mathematically, no problem. It came as an immense surprise and relief that Nemo is very capable of doing this. Okay, you know that it can carry out this complex statistical task quite handily. And eventually, what happens is that you have this representation of a noun. Okay, here is a representation of dog. Okay, in the noun lexicon area, there is a symbol dog. There is a phonetics area where we have a phonetic root for dog. Okay, it is phonetic information about dog. In the beginning, it's only the sequence of phonemes, but eventually there is going to be spelling and things like that. Okay, but in any event, this particular area and representations, for which there is a lot of evidence in neurolinguistics, is very strongly connected with the symbol dog, which resides in the lexical area. And this particular symbol, because it's a representation of a tangible noun, has extremely strong affinity with visual representations. Okay, maybe also motor, maybe olfactory, maybe also emotive, as here. So you know that you may fear dogs, you may love dogs, but you know, and this representation is particular for this speaker, right? I mean, but the point is that this representation is created successfully through the grounding representation of sentences. Okay. And verbs is very similar, okay? Except that the difference is that the main strong synaptic connectivity is with the mirror neurons for crawling in the motor system, okay? So this is how we represent the verbs and nouns, I mean, in our system. And it's nothing novel, or you know, it has been conjectured, and there is a lot of evidence that this is how more or less words are represented in the brain. It's called the hub and spokes semantic network. So every word representation, look here, is a star of assemblies. Okay, the symbol is the center of the star. The phonetics is essentially the root of the star. Okay, it has a very strong root, and the rest are sort of, you know, satellites that help define its meaning. And of course, the assemblies of the star, their size and overlap, the strengths of their synaptic connections to the symbol are all dynamic and encode the meaning of this word for the speaker at this moment. Okay, so remember that when we said what our goal is to build a language system on top of what the chimps have. Okay, so you know, so we deserve to use everything that the chimps can do. Okay, we allow ourselves to use you know, I call it a reduction to non-human primates. Okay, that's good. By the way, this representation can support multilinguality, and we are working on this, but this is another topic. Very good. The second test is can it generate? After the presentation of all these sentences, we present to the sensory motor system a scene that was never seen before, like a dog chasing a cat. And we are asking the device, what's up? And the device should output the dog chases the cat, okay? And it does. This is sort of, you know, this is our test of the experiment. Incidentally, why not cat chases the dog? Okay, how can you distinguish the two? By grounding. Okay, that's an important question. It's an important subject, and perhaps the greatest technical difficulty we overcame in this project. You know, how are the roles? You know, how are the roles of the two nouns determined? The question is, how are they determined in the brains of dogs, of cats, of apes? Okay, and they are determined. And we are pretty much know the answer. It's done in a place in the above the language organs, or in the left hemisphere, the temporoparietal junction. Okay, the left temporoparietal junction. Okay, and the left TPJ is a wonderful organ. I mean, it has been studied. It has many functions. The right has very different functions from the left. Steve Pinker has called it that the seat of mentalese. Okay, the elementary language that all mental language that all animals at least more advanced animals, according to Steve Pinker, use. What it does, if it looks at this, if you input to it a scene in which a complex scene where there is an action taking place that has an agent and a patient, then it figures out what the action is, who is the patient, and who is the agent. All right, and presumably represented by assemblies connected to the right base assemblies. This is how by the way, there are experiments where you show a chimp, another chimp pushing a chair, and you watch the TPJ as it figures out what's happening. Another chimp is pushing a chair, and then you show a woman pushing a chimp, and then it takes 10 times more because now the roles could be reversed, and you have to be careful to figure out which of the two happens. Okay, whereas a chair never pushes chimps. Okay, good. So how many sentences are how poor is the stimulus? How many sentences? It turns out that the constant in the order notation is about 10. Okay, so with a few hundred sentences, we have the device has learned the meaning, a syntactic role of the words. Single word tutoring helps. Okay, so you know what modern parents do these days. Okay. So this is I describe. I emptied my stack. I described to you the language acquisition system. Scale to 200 words. We have done that. Ultimately to many more. This is quite far away. Okay, this is the important front we're working on right now, and I don't know how much I'll have time to tell you. Things like mystery, negotiate, available, and so on. Okay, these are much more subtle to represent, and in fact, cognitive linguistics is it's a very controversial subject. Okay, so there's a 50-page paper sort of dissecting the 20 different theories about abstract word representations with 500 references. Okay, so it's a major subject, very difficult subject, very controversial subject. But we are tackling it from the constructive point of view. Okay, we want to create something that does it. Okay, and it's biologically plausible, and we are on our way. Important social language. Okay, so that incidentally. Just understanding action verbs and tangible objects, okay, and their syntactic roles and so on. The language that Nemo speaks right now, and it's not just English, okay. It can be any language, of course. But this language, you are right to say that. Come on, that's nothing. That's not what language is. Language is abstract words, and language is social language. Okay, so it is social. It's speech acts. Okay, it's use of language. Language as a means of manipulation and things like that. And I totally agree with you. It's theory of mind. It's all these things. Absolutely. Okay, I agree. But consider this, okay? If we found a tribe of bonobos somewhere that can do what Nemo does, then it will be over, okay? The dogma of exclusivity will be done, okay? We're not alone. There are other animals. Well, if our folks who are the Simon folks who are studying whale communication decide that they have the capabilities of this Nemo language acquisition, then the game is over. Okay, language is not an exclusively human trait. Okay, and in any event, the Nemo can do this, and I'm sure that Nemo will master abstract words and social language in time. Okay, so there are scientists of syntax who are going to work on this, of semantics, like semantic primitives, metaphors, garden paths, and things like that. We'll work on this. And one warning is that this could be the end of the innocence for Nemo, and maybe axiom number 6 and 7 and 8 will be needed. Okay. Some more advanced features maybe have to be added. So let me tell you about first steps to abstract words. Identify semantic primitives. This is one approach that semanticists have to that. And what are these? Okay, sensorimotor is one. Okay, that definitely the way that action verbs and tangible objects are implemented is available also for abstract words. There are abstract words like anger that are very easily representable because they are grounded in the emotion, in the sort of in the basal ganglia and amygdala, and also nausea. Okay, in interoception. Thought actions like believe and fantasize. Okay, so these are I can believe that these are represented. Valence, very important. Is it good for me or is it bad for me? Like frames, like self versus other, of the group or not of the group, status versus affiliation. Okay, in other words, this social act does increase my status or does it create affiliates for me? This is time, space, process. Weight, motion. Sort of all these things are possibilities that for grounding abstract words. Okay, and are under consideration. Since we are talking about abstract words, large language models are three fine abstract words. Okay, and we use them. Okay, abstract words research in psycholinguistics is done through questionnaires, and we answer questionnaires through LLMs, and I'm sure that many of you have discovered that LLMs are both dream human subjects and human subjects from hell. Okay, sometimes. Here is something we did. We took the word embeddings. In other words, the way that one particular giant LLM represents the abstract words, and as a vector of about 1,000 components, and found its PCA components. Okay, and the first PCA component. It's funny, okay. So what do you think the first PCA component of the most important direction, sort of the most important classification criterion for a word is? It turns out is how subjective and related to emotion is versus how objective and related to the word it is. The second component is how good it is for you. The third component, I couldn't figure it out. The same for the fourth, fifth, and so on. Okay, but still, the first and second made my day. Finally, the radical idea for achieving social language is to have Nemo be adopted by a family of LLMs. Okay, and that's we are provide an LLM could provide two carers, a sibling, a rival, a villain, sort of, a few interesting situations so that the LLM the Nemo can go about becoming more and more sophisticated socially. Okay. Good. So these are all ideas. I'm done. The study of language in the brain is fascinating, bottomless. It gets you very easily to incredibly profound questions, close to very profound questions. We are very interested in abstract words and social learning, and ultimately, we are interested to see if Nemo is the right vehicle for approaching what Axel calls a logic for the transformation of neural activity into cognition. Okay, so thanks for your attention. It's amazing to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christos. Let's see if we have any questions. Here we go.
Hi, David Chalmers. I was
hello.
interested in your remark that this is the simplest possible model of the brain. And I was just curious to hear you unpack that a little more.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
simplest
Thanks.
on what scale and simplest meaning what constraints.
Yeah. I mean, I meant it in a part. I can defend many dimensions, but I mean, the easiest one is that it's minimal. That you can't take something out and still have it do something interesting. Do that make sense?
It makes sense. A lot's got to matter on your scale of interestingness now, but thanks.
Hi, Christos, this has been. I'm really
Hi.
glad to see all the progress.
Hi.
And one question I have is for multimodality data, because the brain doesn't just take language data, right? All of this richness of the language, it's kind of backed up by visual, audio. Do you have any plan to expand your Nemo to take into account multimodal information?
I don't know. You were here. It's we use multimodal information. We live and thrive on multimodal information. This is the only thing we do. This is the only way that that Nemo. I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear that language acquisition is a richly, profoundly multimodal affair. Okay, so sound exists, vision exists, smell exists. So everything is happening, and language is sort of the result. Okay, so is the final footnote. Okay, but I mean, it's a whole dance of multimodal stuff. Okay.
Yeah, but I think in your framework, are you going to try to simulate the multimodal input and?
We have to talk about it separately, because what I'm trying to do for the past 45 minutes is convince you that I only do multimodal, nothing else. Okay, that the input is very multimodal.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
I'll
you.
follow up. Yeah.
Thanks. It was a brilliant talk. Thank you. That was a follow-up on that. So just so that I understand, when you have the image of the dog chasing the cat, do you actually present a video clip? Do you present an image, and how does the system extract what the stimuli and stuff are in there, or do you provide that labeling or?
Yeah. I provide that labeling. Essentially, when I say that the dog is chasing the cat, what happens is that the mirror neurons for chase are pulsating, are firing. The neurons that represent the primordial cat are also firing, and the same for dog. Is it clear?
Yeah, that's
so-
great.
so-
So
so
you're
it-
sort
I
of
know.
simulating multimodal input without having to do the kind of nuts and bolts of interpreting the image.
Exactly. I mean, the same way that we could just say on a mic, the dog chases the cat, and have sort of some system press the buttons that we really press. The same way we could do to extract by another system video, sort of information from video, and then feed it into the sensory and motor brain. Okay. Is this clear? I mean, we could have done that. In computer science, we call this syntactic sugar. In other words, an interface. We could have done that, but we didn't.
Yeah,
we
that's clear.
we
Thank
go
you very
directly to
much.
the brain. Thanks. Sure.
Any other questions? Here we go.
Hi, Christos. Good to see you remotely. It's Allison.
Hi, Alison.
I think it might be worth looking at some of the developmental literature because, at the risk of sounding rude, people tried to do what you're describing about 30 years ago, and it failed as an account of what children were actually doing when they were learning words. So the idea that there was this relatively simple set of semantic primitives that were concrete, and then you could put them together to get to semantics just doesn't turn out to characterize what the children are doing well at all. Because, for example, very characteristically, the semantic scope of the children's words is really different from the scope of the words. The words at 2 are really different from the scope of the words at 3, which are really different from the adult scope, and they're often unpredictably connected to the particular kinds of cognitive and social problems that children are trying to solve at that moment. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that the way that children are actually doing it is like the way that your system is doing it. But I think it would be worth taking a look at that. Literature. Again, at the risk of being egocentric, I was just at the SPP 50th anniversary, and when I started my graduate work, I started it 50 years ago, thinking that what we would do is look at children and find the language of thought, because the children would use all the semantic primitives. And not just my work, but I think lots of other people's work suggests that was not a successful strategy for children. Now, again, maybe children aren't learning the same way your system are, but I think it'd be worth taking a look at that.
Sure. Yes. I mean, as you said yourself, if our system, I have spent the last 2 years reading about language acquisition. Standard books, a lot of papers, and so on. So I have if you argue to me in a little more detail an argument that what I'm doing is not what children are doing, I will be interested, but certainly not devastated. As I told you, as I said, what I'm trying to do is create a language system. Okay, so if it duplicates what the human language system, excellent, fine, perhaps boring. If it does it in a different way, maybe we should look for the planet where this happens. Okay.
Okay, do we have any other questions? We have time for one more question. Okay.
Christos, you have again. So I wonder if you can say a bit more about, so you started with this like very randomly initialized elastic and flexible system. And then later on, when you were doing the experiments, you were, if I understand correctly, you were assigning regions to specific parts of speech, like verbs and nouns. And I'm not a neuroscientist, but I think it's pretty established that there are kind of like regions in the brain that have certain functionality, and they repeat between people. Whereas if you had if everything was kind of like tabula rasa, randomly initialized, you would expect every brain to be different in some degree and not really follow the same structures, because it's all kind of a complete chaos and mess, right?
Great question. Thanks, Yoav. No. It's if we train 10,000 different emotes. They will all sort of have quirks and different representations, but they will all use the same areas in the same way, like all humans do. And the reason is that what determines this is basically the tabula rasa, that it's not just areas, it is also LRIs and fibers, okay? And we all have the same system of areas, fibers, and LRIs. And it is those that together with the external stimuli determine the way that we're going to learn language. And so there will be complete duplication, with a lot of randomness in the details. For example, sort of, the neurons in my brain that represent apple may be completely different in the other corner of your lexicon cortex than the ones that you use for apple. Okay, but that's fine. That's randomness. Okay, and a lot of randomness will happen. But the function of the areas and of the fibers and LRIs will be the same.
Should I think about it as some kind of like a biological topography that we are kind of like building your cities on differently between people, but the ground is the same and shared?
Yeah, I mean, so if you wish, we assume that there is a developmental program, developmental in the sense of biology, that lays out these areas, these boundaries, these systems of synapses, these fibers, these LIs, and they're roughly the same from one individual to the next.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the last question.
Okay.
Yeah. No, wait. One more. Sorry, I said a comment. Okay, we have a comment.
Hi, everyone. Christos, this is Dan in the audience. I'm going to just add a little comment to the previous two questions that occurred to me.
Thanks.
So for Allison's question about language acquisition, indeed, we have talked to a lot of language acquisition specialists who had similar reactions, but I think it actually helped us understand that basically another answer to your question is what this NEMO algorithm does is specifically a very early stage in language acquisition. And not even the full picture there, but it's, I think, reasonably a good model or even hypothesis for what's going on in the very early stage of language acquisition. So specifically like up to around 2 years of age, or what's called the 2-word acquisition stage, roughly speaking, where you have these very concrete nouns and action verbs. And well, it's true observationally, and this is what they're producing. There's other details like they're attending to functional categories and things like this, which we know about, and it's interesting. And those effects seem to come in later for how they acquire like slightly more abstract words and how later on they start producing 3-word sentences and so on. But I don't know. I don't think it's completely, maybe we should discuss offline, but I think like the point was that this sort of shows how the earliest, most concrete kinds of nouns and verbs are acquired with like relatively consistent perceptual signatures in the environment of the child.
Thanks, Dan.
Like hold on, for example, or uh-oh, or down, or more, here, which appear across many different languages, and which don't, I mean, you might, the trouble is superficially, you can say, oh yeah, those are just weird, routine social words, but when you actually look at the semantics of those early words, they're very consistent across children, and again, interestingly, across languages. But what they encode is really different from the sort of things that the same words encode in adults, and they're not like concrete verbs, and they're not like concrete nouns, and they're not directly associated with perception. And again, we did work for a fairly long time that showed that they're connected to fairly abstract conceptual changes that are going on in the child's understanding. So it's just, I mean, and I guess the reason I'm being particularly the reason I really want to make this point is because that often has been sort of the first pass intuition that people have had is, oh, the babies, they're starting out with just these, very concrete, dog goes to this particular picture of a dog. And that just isn't what happens when you look at 15 to 18-month-olds. Now, even if you look at nouns, for example, nouns aren't just mapped onto specific perceptual piece of information. And again, this goes back to work that people like Hugh Clark, Lois Bloom, who actually did empirical, Mike Brown, has some data about this. So again, maybe if you want a language acquisition system, it could work that way. But I think there's a conceptual point here which is important. And the conceptual point is, so yeah, maybe babies are weird. They use gone to talk about a range of disappearances that they produce themselves in conjunction with object permanence, but maybe that's just a weird thing about human babies that isn't really relevant to everyone. Here's the thing that is relevant. One of the things about language is that it can accommodate really important changes in the environment and your conception of the environment. So when Christos was talking about, well, what do we do about abstract words? What do we do about words in science where they're, the whole point about those words is that they don't have a simple relationship to, to the external world. That's something that seems to be true about language, not just sort of late when you're talking about science, but seems to be true about language from the beginning. So again, another example of all of Susan Gilman's work about the use of nouns, for example, suggests that what nouns are encoding is an abstract notion that there's some causal feature out there in the world that's responsible for correlations among perceptual features. So they're not, again, from the very beginning, they're not encoding the perceptual feature. What they're encoding is this very abstract idea that there's some essence, there's some causal, some unobservable causal underlying variable that is actually responsible for the correlation among the features. And that's, again, this is not like obscure. This is not my work. This is Susan Gelman's work, which is sort of the foundation. And that's a really, really different picture of what's going on in semantics than the picture that it's just encoding some kind of network of perceptual features. And it's connected, again, I think it's connected to things like the way that LLMs fail because of their lack of connection to what's going on in the external world. And that idea about there's an external world, have all sorts of different features. It's abstractly causally responsible for the features that you see. That's a very different picture than the picture that says it's just a summary, for example, of the features you see. And that abstract kind of semantics isn't just something that we get in science where we, have the kind of Putnam and Kripke examples about triggers. That's something that's there from as early as kids are talking. But anyway, we can talk about it.
Yeah, Christos, I don't know if you could catch any of that, but we have some great topics.
I wish I got caught 10 times more. Sorry, I wish.
Oh, you're okay. Well, I know, but yeah, next time we'll figure the microphone. Sorry, but we have some great topics for today's discussion, it seems. So please, keep these questions in mind. Christos, we want to thank you for joining us. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
And we'll take a short break and we'll